Transformation of the sciences of man. In Nietzsche's view, the balance sheet of the sciences is a depressing one. Passive, reactive, and negative concepts predominate everywhere. They always try to interpret phenomena in terms of reactive forces. We have already seen this in the case of physics and biology, but when we look seriously at the science of man, we see the development of the reactive and negative interpretation of phenomenon. Utility, adaptation, regulation, and even forgetting serve as explanatory concepts. Ignorance of origins and the genealogy of forces is obvious everywhere, in the sciences of man and even in those of nature. It could be said that the scientist sets up the triumph of reactive forces as his model and wants to chain thought to it. He makes much of his respect for facts and his love of truth, but the fact is an interpretation. What type of interpretation? Truth expresses a will. Who wills truth? And what does he who says, "I am seeking the truth," will? Science today is taking the exploration of nature and man further than ever in a particular direction, but it is also taking submission to the ideal and the established order further than ever. Scholars, even democratic and socialist ones, do not lack piety. They have merely invented a theology which no longer depends on the heart. Observe the ages in the history of peoples when the scholar steps into the foreground. They are ages of exhaustion, often of evening and decline. The misrecognition of action, of all that is active, is obvious in the sciences of man. For example, action is judged in terms of its utility. It would be precipitate to say that utilitarianism is today an outdated doctrine. In the first place, if this is so, it partly is thanks to Nietzsche. Furthermore, a doctrine only lets itself become outdated when it has spread its principles and hidden its postulates in the doctrines which succeed it. Nietzsche asks, what does the concept of utility refer to? That is, to whom is an action useful or harmful? Who considers action from the standpoint of its utility or harmfulness, its motives and consequences? Not the one who acts. He does not consider action. It is rather the third party, the sufferer, or the spectator. He is the person who considers the action that he does not perform, precisely because he does not perform it, as something to evaluate from the standpoint of the advantage which he draws or can draw from it. The person who does not act considers that he possesses a natural light over action, that he deserves to derive advantage or profit from it. We can guess the source of utility. It is the source of all passive concepts in general. Ressentiment, nothing but the requirements of ressentiment. Utility serves us as an example here, but in any case, the taste for replacing real relations between forces by an abstract relation which is supposed to express them all as a measure seems to be an integral part of science and also of philosophy. In this respect, Hegel's objective spirit is no more valid than the no less objective concept of utility. Now, in this abstract relation, whatever it is, we always end up replacing real activities, creating, speaking, loving, etc., by the third party's perspective on these activities. The essence of the activity is confused with the gains of a third party, which he claims that he ought to profit from, whose benefits he claims the right to reap, whether he is God, objective spirit, humanity, culture, or even the proletariat. Take another example, that of linguistics. Language is usually judged from the standpoint of the hearer. Nietzsche dreams of another philology, an active philology. The secret of the world is no more on the side of one who hears than the secret of the will is on the side of one who obeys, or the secret of force on the side of one who reacts. Nietzsche's active philology has only one principle. A word only means something insofar as the speaker wills something by saying it. And one rule, treating speech as a real activity, placing oneself at the point of view of the speaker. The lordly right of giving names extends so far that one should allow oneself to conceive the origin of language itself as an expression of power on the part of rulers. They say this is this and this. They seal everything and event with a sound and, as it were, take possession of it. Active linguistics looks to discover who it is that speaks and names. Who uses a particular word? What does he apply it to, first of all? Himself, someone else who listens, something else, and with what intention? What does he will by uttering a particular word? The transformation of the sense of a word means that someone else, another force and another will, has taken possession of it and is applying it to another thing because he wants something else. The whole Nietzschean conception of etymology and philology, which is often misunderstood, depends upon this principle and this rule. Nietzsche applies it brilliantly in the genealogy of morals, where he considers the word good, its etymology, its sense and transformation of this sense. He shows how the word good was originally created by the masters who applied it to themselves, then taken from their mouths by the slaves who were able to call the masters the evil ones. What would a truly active science be like, one permeated by active concepts like this new philology? Only an active science is capable of discovering active forces and also of recognizing reactive forces for what they are, forces. Only an active science is capable of interpreting real activities and real relations between forces. It therefore appears in three forms: a symptomatology, since it interprets phenomena, treating them as symptoms whose sense must be sought in the forces that produce them; a typology, since it interprets forces from the standpoint of their quality, be it active or reactive; a genealogy, since it evaluates the origin of forces from the point of view of their nobility or baseness, since it discovers their ancestry in the will to power and the quality of this will. All the sciences, including the sciences of nature, are brought together in such a conception, as are science and philosophy. When science stops using passive concepts, it stops being a positivism, and philosophy ceases to be a utopia, a rhetoric on activity which makes up for this positivism. The philosopher, as such, is a symptomatologist, a typologist, and a genealogist. We can recognize this Nietzschean trinity of the philosopher of the future. The philosopher-physician, the physician interprets symptoms; the philosopher-artist, the artist molds types; the philosopher-legislator, the legislator determines rank, genealogy. Nietzsche also encounters his own Socrates. Hierarchy. Nietzsche also encounters his own Socrates. These are the free thinkers. They say, "What are you complaining about? How could the weak have triumphed if they did not form superior force? Let us bow down before accomplished fact." This is modern positivism. They claim to carry out the critique of values. They claim to refuse all appeals to transcendent values. They declare them unfashionable, but only in order to rediscover them as the forces which run the world of today. The value of church, morality, state, etc. is only discussed so that their human force and content can be admired. The free thinker has the strange craze for recovering every content, everything positive, but without ever questioning the nature of these self-styled positives, or the origin or quality of the corresponding human forces. This is what Nietzsche calls fatalism in the genealogy of morals. The free thinker wants to discover the content of all religion, but never considers that religion might in fact contain man's basest forces, forces which we might want to leave behind. This is why we can have no confidence in a free thinker's atheism, even when he is a Democrat and a socialist. It is the church and not its poison that repels us. Genealogy of morals. The essential characteristics of the freethinker's positivism and humanism are fatalism, interpretive impotence, and ignorance of the qualities of force. As soon as something appears as a human force or fact, the freethinker applauds it, without wondering whether this force is of base extraction, whether this fact is the opposite of a high fact, human, all too human. Because it does not take the qualities of forces into account, free thought is, by vocation, at the service of reactive forces and expresses their triumph. For the fact is always something used by the weak against the strong. The fact is always stupid, having at all times resembled a calf rather than a god. Nietzsche opposes the free spirit to the free thinker, the spirit of interpretation itself, which judges forces from the standpoint of their origin and quality. There are no facts, nothing but interpretations. The critique of the freethinker is a fundamental theme in Nietzsche's work, because this critique discloses a perspective from which many different ideologies can be attacked at once: positivism, humanism, the dialectic, positivism's taste for facts, humanism's exaltation of the human fact, and the dialectic's mania for recovering human contents. In Nietzsche, the word hierarchy has two senses. It signifies firstly the difference between active and reactive forces, the superiority of active to reactive forces. Nietzsche can thus speak of an unalterable and innate order of rank and hierarchy, and the problem of hierarchy itself is the problem of free spirits. But hierarchy also designates the triumph of reactive forces, the contagion of the reactive forces, and the complex organization which results where the weak have conquered, where the strong are contaminated, where the slave who has not stopped being a slave prevails over the master who has stopped being one, the reign of law and of virtue. In this second sense, morality and religion are still theories of hierarchy. If we compare the two senses, we see that the second is like the reverse of the first. We make church, morality, and state the master or keepers of all hierarchy. We have the hierarchy that we deserve, we who are essentially reactive, we who take the triumphs of reaction for a transformation of action and slaves for new masters, we who only recognize hierarchy back to front. What Nietzsche calls weak or slavish is not the least strong, but that which, whatever its strength, is separated from what it can do. The least strong is as strong as the strong if he goes to the limit, because the cunning, the subtlety, the wit, and even the charm by which he makes up for his lesser strength are part of this strength, so that it is no longer the least. Zarathustra's two animals are the eagle and the serpent. The eagle is strong and proud, but the serpent, being crafty and charming, is no less strong. The measure of forces and their qualification does not depend on absolute quantity, but rather on relative accomplishment. Strength or weakness cannot be judged by taking the resultant success of struggle as a criterion. For once again, it is a fact that the weak triumph. It is even the essence of fact. Forces can only be judged if one takes into account in the first place their active or reactive quality, and in the second place the affinity of this quality for the corresponding pole of the will to power, affirmative or negative, and in the third place the nuance of quality that the force presents at a particular moment of its development in relation to its affinity. Thus, reactive force is 1. Utilitarian force of adaptation and partial limitation. 2. Force which separates active force from what it can do, which denies active force, triumph of the weak or the slaves. 3. Force separated from what it can do, which denies or turns against itself, reign of the weak or of slaves. And analogously, active force is 1. Plastic, dominant, and subjugating force. 2. Force which goes to the limit of what it can do. 3. Force which affirms its difference, which makes its difference an object of enjoyment and affirmation. Forces are only concretely and completely determined if these three pairs of characteristics are taken into account simultaneously. The form of the question in Nietzsche. Metaphysics formulated the question of essence in the form, what is? We have perhaps picked up the habit of considering that this question is obvious. In fact, we owe it to Socrates and Plato. We must go back to Plato to see just how far the question, what is, presupposes a particular way of thinking. Plato asks, what is beauty, what is justice, etc. He wants to oppose this form of the question to all other forms. He sometimes sets Socrates against very young men, sometimes against stubborn old men, sometimes against famous sophists. They all seem to produce the same form of reply, citing the one that is just, the one that is beautiful, a young virgin, a mare, a cooking pot. Socrates triumphs. One does not reply to the question, what is beauty, by citing the one that is beautiful. So we get the distinction dear to Plato between beautiful things, which are only beautiful, for example, accidentally and according to becoming, and beauty, which is nothing but beautiful, necessarily beautiful, the one that is beautiful in its being and essence. This is why in Plato the opposition of essence and appearance, of being and becoming, depend primarily on a mode of questioning, a form of question. Nevertheless, we should ask ourselves whether Socrates' triumph is deserved. For the Socratic method does not seem to be fruitful. It dominates the so-called aporetic dialogue, where nihilism is king. It is undoubtedly a blunder to cite something beautiful when you are asked what is beauty, but it is less certain that the question, what is beauty, is not itself a blunder. It is by no means certain that it is legitimate and well put, even and above all, as a way of discovering essence. Sometimes a brief flash of light in the dialogue gives us a momentary indication of what the sophist idea was. Mixing the sophists up with old men and youngsters is a procedure of amalgamation. The sophist Hippias was not a child who was content to answer the question, which one, when asked the question, what is? He thought that the question, which one, was the best kind of question, the most suitable for determining essence. For it does not refer, as Socrates believed, to discrete examples, but to the continuity of concrete objects taken in their becoming, to the becoming beautiful of all objects citable or cited as examples. Asking which one is beautiful, which one is just, and not what beauty is, what justice is, was therefore the result of a worked-out method, implying an original conception of essence in a whole sophistic art, which was opposed to the dialectic, an empirical and pluralist art. What is it? I cried out with curiosity. Which one is it? You ought to ask. Thus spoke Dionysus, then kept quiet in his own special way, that is to say, in an enticing way. According to Nietzsche, the question, which one, qui, means this. What are the forces which take hold of a given thing? What is the will that possesses it? Which one is expressed, manifested, and even hidden in it? We are led to essence only by the question, which one? For essence is merely the sense and value of the thing. Essence is determined by the forces with affinity for the thing, and by the will with affinity for these forces. Moreover, when we ask the question, what is it? Qu'est-ce que? We not only fall into the worst metaphysics, but in fact we merely ask the question, which one, in a blind, unconscious, and confused way. The question, what is it, is a way of establishing a sense seen from another point of view. Essence, being, is a perspectival reality and presupposes a plurality. Fundamentally, it is always the question, what is it for me, for us, for everyone that sees, etc. What beauty is, we ask from what standpoint things appear beautiful. And something which does not appear beautiful to us, from what standpoint would it become so? And for a particular thing, what are the forces which make or would make it beautiful by appropriating it? What are the other factors which yield to these or on the contrary resist them? The pluralist art does not deny essence. It makes it depend in each case on an affinity of phenomena and forces, on a coordination of force and will. The essence of a thing is discovered in the force which possesses it and which is expressed in it. It is developed in the forces with affinity for the first one, endangered or destroyed by the forces which are opposed to it and which can take hold of it. Essence is always sense and value. And so the question, which one, reverberates in and for all things. Which forces, which will? This is the tragic question. At the deepest level, the whole of it is held out to Dionysus, for Dionysus is the god who hides and reveals himself. Dionysus is will. Dionysus is the one that, the question, which one, finds its supreme instance in Dionysus, or in the will to power. Dionysus, the will to power, is the one that answers it each time it is put. We should not ask which one wills, which one interprets, which one evaluates, for everywhere and always the will to power is the one that. Dionysus is the god of transformations, the unity of multiplicity, the unity that affirms multiplicity and is affirmed by it. Which one is it? It is always him. This is why Dionysus keeps tantalizingly quiet, to gain time to hide himself, to take another form, and to change forces. In Nietzsche's work, the admirable poem Ariadne's Complaint expresses this fundamental relation between a way of questioning and the divinity hidden behind every question, between the pluralist question and Dionysian or tragic affirmation.